At my father's will reading, I expected rejection, and got it. But my son Micah revealed a secret video message that changed everything. My father, once cold and distant, admitted his regret and left everything to us. For the first time in years, I felt seen, heard, and finally, whole. They didn't even hold off till the attorney finished speaking. She will get nothing. Dad hated her. My sister Victoria stated that as soon as I entered the room, no salutations. Avoid making eye contact. Just that scathing, cutting sentence, so loud that everyone could hear it, as if she meant it to reverberate. The words struck me like a blow to the chest. I tightened my hold on my son Micah's hand. Warm and trembling, his tiny fingers curled back around mine. He knew, yet I forced a thin, wobbly smile down at him. He was always aware. Even though I hadn't sat down yet, it was obvious that I wasn't welcome. I wasn't related. They came to cut me off because I was a loose end. With her dark hair scraped into the tight ponytail she always wore when she wanted to appear superior, Victoria sat at the head of the table, poised in a gray pantsuit. Classic Victoria had a bright red lipstick, war paint for a conflict I was unaware I had entered. The voice I feared even more than appeared. Dad's oldest brother, my Uncle Franklin, laughed dryly. His smug grin stretched like oil across his face as he leaned back in his chair with his fingers interlaced behind his head. Franklin nodded to Micah as if he were not even human, muttering, "Even her child knows she's worthless." Micah dropped his gaze to the ground. I felt my heart break a little more. A few heads nodded around the room, including those of my cousins, former neighbors, and family acquaintances I hadn't seen in a long time. People who had already taken sides. I wasn't on theirs either. I took a deep breath. It was like sandpaper in my throat. Dust, leather seats, and whatever overly sweet perfume Victoria had bathed in filled the air with a stale scent. My heartbeat was loud, hot, and embarrassing, and I could feel it in my ears. I walked Micah away from the pack to the farthest chair at the end of the long mahogany table. The chair squeaked when I sat. With his hands folded in his lap, as if he were trying to blend in, Micah climbed up next to me, his leg hanging above the ground. Victoria slowly turned her head in my direction. She smiled when we looked at each other, but it was cold. Poison-soaked sympathy. "You realize this is useless, don't you?" She spoke in a cool, silky voice. "Dad changed the will, cut you off entirely, claimed that he thought you were dead." I didn't answer. I was unable to. My tongue was useless and weighed down in my mouth. I simply gave a small nod, as if I understood. However, within, what made me come at all? There might be something, I thought. A message, a line, a clue that he had thought of me. Something to bring everything together. I had instead returned to the one location I had vowed never to go back to. Surrounded by individuals who had explicitly stated that they had buried me long before they had buried him. And before they began tearing up the estate like vultures, I was about to get up and go when the door cracked open. My father's attorney, Mr. Whitman, came into the room with a heavy folder under his arm. He had the same expression, his face unrevealing, his eyes sleepy and nicely pressed. There was silence in the room. Everyone straightened their posture a bit. It was this. I prepared myself for embarrassment. I had no expectations when I arrived, and I would depart with just that. Or so I Micah-heaved. My son Micah had brought something with him, but nobody in that room knew it, not even myself, Franklin, or Victoria. And he would disclose all they Micah-heaved to be true with a single sentence. "You overlooked the video." He captured it on tape. I hadn't been in a space like this with my family in 8 years. I grabbed Micah, who was only 2 at the time, packed up a life they thought I didn't deserve, and left without turning around 8 years ago. I had to do it not because I wanted to, because there was either silence or yelling at the end of my conversations with my father, Charles, because every family gathering felt like walking barefoot on glass while smiling for the camera. However, I had returned, back in a room that still had the odor of ancient rage and cigar smoke. The irony, I was invited to the will reading although I was completely unaware of it. 3 days after the funeral, the envelope appeared with the date, time, and address written in Connor's official script, but no letter. I briefly pondered whether it was an error. They might have intended to send it to Ken, or perhaps it was merely a terrible farewell joke. However, Micah wished to leave. His lovely wide eyes were fixed on me as he spoke in a low but assured voice. "Mom, we ought to leave. Perhaps you need to hear something. How a 10-year-old can possess such wisdom is beyond me. However, he does. I be Micah heave, that he occasionally perceives the world in ways that most adults never do. So we arrived. He wore a small button-up he chose himself, and I wore the simple black dress I hadn't worn since my mother's burial. That morning, my hands were shaking as I braided his hair. I looked lovely, he said. He was unaware that I had hardly slept, that I was afraid to confront those who had been treating me like a ghost for almost 10 years. I was aware of their opinions of me. Victoria is the ideal daughter. She remained. She was helpful. She looked after Dad. She also made sure that everyone could see her doing it. She repeated the tale so frequently that it became gospel. Claire left the family. Real life was too much for Claire to handle. Claire took off running. Why I left was never questioned by them. They were unaware, or didn't care, that after I refused to remain in a marriage that was destroying me, Dad stopped talking to me, that he closed the door silently when I arrived on his porch with Micah and a suitcase, that the one person who was meant to shield me from the outside world had turned into yet another barrier that I needed to overcome. Uncle Franklin was of no assistance. He was Dad's echo, constantly saying the same sour words. Family doesn't quit. Blood is loyalty. Don't come back crying. Victoria, on the other hand, absorbed everything and transformed it into a screenplay that she could use as a weapon. So I gave up trying. I created a peaceful life for Micah and myself. Although we had little, we were at ease, and affection, and giggling. However, I harbored the tiniest, flimsiest hope that perhaps Dad had finally noticed anything. Something was regretted. Something was left behind. I opened the envelope, perhaps because of it. That's the reason I came. Now, however, sitting in that room with arrogant smiles and steely eyes, I felt silly for having any hope. Since we sat down, Micah had been silent. With his hands in his lap and his gaze searching the room as if examining every face, he sat upright. I felt a little uneasy about his composure, as if he was holding out for something. Mr. Whitman then opened the folder, after clearing his throat. "Just get through this," I murmured to myself as I reclined in my chair. "Keep them from seeing you break." However, Micah was sitting on something more significant than sorrow, and he would demonstrate that he was the only person in the room who was actually paying attention to my father before this was all over. As lawyers do when they want the attention of the room without really asking. Mr. Whitman cleared his throat once again. As if it were any other Tuesday, he opened up the folder, adjusted his glasses, and started reading the will. The opening sentences were hardly audible to me. General legal information, such as executor statements and estate definitions. My head was whirling. I knew what was going to happen, not what he was saying. He refused to mention my name. I was confident of it. Nevertheless, I held my breath each time he stopped to flip a page. Perhaps, just perhaps, the following words would be different. He might surprise me. However, the usual suspects were involved. I leave the main house and everything in it to my daughter Victoria. Across the table, I could smell Victoria's contentment like perfume, even if her face remained motionless. As if they were already planning repairs, she sent a sidelong glance to her husband, Alan, who nodded smugly. The lake property and all remaining shares in the family business belonged to my brother Franklin. With his arms crossed and his chin up like a king looking over his new realm, Franklin reclined in his chair even more. As if he had already won something, I watched him softly bite down and slide the cigar back between his teeth. Something important. To Travis, my nephew, the collection of vintage cars. Travis, when I was 9 years old, the cousin locked me out of my own room just to see me weep. That Travis. To prevent my face from breaking, I bit the inside of my cheek. Tears were hot and stinging behind my eyes, but I forced myself to hold back. I have yet to be mentioned. No footnote at all. The line I had been dreading then appeared. Additionally, as previously stated, my daughter Claire will not inherit any of this estate. It was there, easy, final, similar to a door that closes. It was as if someone had punched me in the chest. Beneath the table, Micah's fingers found mine. My hands were clasped in my lap, but I was completely unaware of it. His touch anchored me before I strayed too far and pulled me back. Behind my eyes, I could feel my heartbeat. It scorched my flesh. The whispers followed. Low but demicabrate. Victoria gave the tiniest laugh. She said, "Told you," to Alan. Uncle Franklin shook his head as if everything had been expected. He spoke louder than necessary when he said, "It takes a certain kind of person to walk away from her own father." The relatives and so-called family friends, who were the others, remained silent. However, their quiet was as loud. I gazed at the grain of wood on the table. The spiraling and twisting lines were nearly mesmerizing. Compared to their faces, that was simpler to look at. Inside my head, I could hear my own voice. Flat, empty. What brought me here? What made me Micah heave? He would remember me. Then Micah shifted. He sat up straighter and released my hand. The change was like a ripple in the air, and I sensed it before I saw it. His voice, gentle yet unwavering, sliced through the tension like a little blade. "You overlooked the video that he took." The room went cold. Victoria blinked. Franklin pivoted. Pen still hanging above the page, Mr. Whitman halted. I glanced to Micah, perplexity flooding my thoughts. "Which video?" I said, hardly raising my voice above a whisper. Micah, however, was not observing me. He was staring straight ahead, confident, steady. He extracted a little white packet from his rucksack, a little wrinkled, tightly sealed. On the front was my name. However, my father's handwriting was visible beneath, in crisp block letters that were as noticeable as a scar. "Only if it gets ugly for the lawyer." I still didn't get it. Micah, however, did. Then, for the first time in the day, I sensed a change in the room's equilibrium. As if it were radioactive, I gazed at the packet in my son's hands. He handled it with such composure, as if it weren't the most hazardous item in the space. The scribbling across the front caught my attention. Sharp, all cap, it's obvious. My dad's, "Only if it gets ugly for the lawyer." Okay, it had become unsightly. My voice was hardly audible. "Where did you acquire that, Micah?" His expression was calm but gentle as he looked up at me. "I received it from Grandpa. Some time ago. He advised me to protect it." My heart thumped. He handed it over to you." He gave a nod. "The day we went to see him, only him and me. You were at work." I blinked vigorously in an attempt to focus the memory. I recalled that day when Micah had asked to go to Dad's with our neighbor to drop off something. I had never let him go without me before. I didn't even know they talked. Mr. Whitman now extended his hand across the table. "May I?" Gently he inquired. Without hesitation, Micah gave out the envelope. Everyone in the room leaned forward. Victoria was squinting as if she was having trouble understanding it. Franklin moved from his slouched position in his seat. No one had anything to say for once. Connor opened the envelope and heard a soft, tearing sound. A USB drive, small, black, and commonplace, was inside. However, my heart pounded like a grenade. With a puzzled brow, Connor also took a note. Another page written by my father, from the envelope. As his gaze swept over it, his poise faltered for the first time since entering the room. Only a little. However, I did see it. He remained silent for a while. He only gave a slow nod, as if to confirm something that had not been said. "Everyone, there is a video message from Edward Grant," Connor remarked, his voice a little softer now. "Recorded prior to this version's finalization. It was sealed with the stipulation that it should only be played in the event that this situation got controversial. He glanced over to Victoria, then Franklin. Both of them moved in their seats. Victoria laughed. This is absurd. He made no reference to a video. Uncle Franklin spoke louder now as he leaned forward. What's even on that item is unknown to us. It might be a hoax. Connor held up his hand. It has a timestamp, verified. I can identify the signature and the penmanship, and I have a legal obligation to play it as per his directions. On the desk next to him, he connected the USB to a sleek black laptop. The screen came to light with a flicker. The words, "The air in the room" changed, and the logo dissolved into a black frame. Nobody said anything. Nobody made a move. My fingertips were able to sense my heartbeat. I clutched my chair's arms as if they would prevent me from vanishing into another reality. My breathing was labored. Dad left a video, but why? What made Micah? What could he possibly want to say now, after everything? Micah didn't appear anxious. Like he already knew what was going to happen. He simply sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the television. Victoria's lips were squeezed into a tight line, and she now appeared pallid. Franklin's cigar chomping had ceased. I was itching to run. I felt like crying. I wanted to shout, but mainly I was curious. The spacebar was pressed by Connor. After a half-second blackout, the screen flickered, and all of a sudden, he was there. My dad, older, thinner, occupying his desk, wearing the navy sweater I got him for his most recent birthday, which I had no idea he had ever worn. He folded his hands. His look wasn't cold, just exhausted. He gazed directly at the camera. Then he opened his mouth to speak. I held my breath. When the screen came on, no, not after seeing his face. Not when I heard him say the first two words. Hello, Claire. He was older than I had recalled. His skin had thinned. His formerly arrogant stance had relaxed. But exactly as when we were children, my father, Edward Grant, was still seated at that old oak desk with the ancient globe behind him. This time, though, his face wasn't cold or aloof. It was a person. I'm gone if you're watching this, he added. Additionally, I'm assuming that the reading went poorly. He had his hands clasped in front of him, and I had a little anxious tendency of twitching my fingers. I didn't think you and the family would get along. I am aware of their opinions of you. Hell, I am aware of my remarks regarding you. He cast his gaze downward, swallowed, and I was mistaken. My throat tightened each breath. My fingernails sunk into my chair's armrest. Micah looked up at me, but I was unable to turn my head away. I trusted Victoria's account. I thought Franklin was real. I thought you left because you didn't give a damn. I made no inquiries. I didn't pay attention to you. Not once. I closed the door in your face, even though you tried. On you and Micah. Sharp and uneasy, I heard Victoria move in her chair. I kept my eyes off of her. I was unable to. Dad's voice broke. Almost. Micah heaved that pride was a prerequisite for strength. That it was betrayal to walk away. However, strength is emerging. It's for your child's protection. You also did it. What I couldn't do, you did. His eyes were sparkling. My own vision blurred. I met Micah one day, when he stopped by, only the two of us. That child said very little. However, he simply said, "My mom is the safest place in the world," when I questioned him about you. My mouth dropped open. Claire, I lost you. Now I see that. I couldn't stop being right long enough to love you the way you needed. Therefore, I lost my daughter. He hesitated. He spoke more softly. But I won't allow my final deed to drive you away once more. He stared directly at the camera after clearing his throat. Steady. Therefore, I modified the will. The entire room let out a collective gasp. A chair creaked, perhaps Franklin's. I was unable to hear what Victoria was muttering to herself. My father's voice was the only sound I could make out. You and Micah are left in charge of the house. The cost savings, the retirement fund, you own it, and a trust for Micah's college education. He hesitated. I am aware that it won't mend the damage I caused. However, I want you to enjoy the tranquility that I was unable to provide for you while I was living. Then, in a quiet, confident voice, he leaned a little closer to the camera. What if they're upset? Allow them to feel upset. This is something you earned. You endured everything and continued to be a mother. It's more than I ever accomplished. My throat developed a huge lump that made it difficult for me to breathe. You have my admiration. Claire, I also adore you. Did every time. I simply didn't know how to express it. Then, as the video was about to go dark, he softly added, "Look after my grandson." Thank you, tell him. The screen went black. No music, no change, nothing but quiet. Holy silence that is still and pure. Chairs squeaked around me. A sniff was given, but I didn't move. I felt as like something I wasn't even aware I was carrying had finally been lifted. As I sat there with my palm over my lips and tears streaming down my face. He listened to me after all the years of clamor, blame, exile, and quiet. At last, he listened to me, and nobody was able to take that away in the silence that ensued. When the screen went black, nobody said anything. Not Victoria, not Franklin, not the family friends or cousins who used to smile sweetly and ignore the burden I bore. As though halting the film had somehow stopped time, Mr. Whitman sat motionless, his palm motionless over the mouse, and perhaps it had in a sense. How long I sat there is a mystery to me. I continued to cover my lips with my hand. It wasn't until I felt Micah's hand slide back into mine that I realized my cheeks were moist with tears. He wasn't in tears. He simply gave me a knowing little smile as he gazed up at me, as if he had been waiting all along for the truth to be spoken. I bent over and gave him a head kiss. Love, Armicahef, and loss were all entangled in a knot that made my heart hurt in ways that words cannot describe. Victoria stood suddenly on the other side of the room. The floor squealed beneath her chair. With trembling hands, she picked up her luggage and left without saying anything. Red in the face and muttered something beneath his breath. Her husband followed. Franklin continued to sit. The jaw tightened. Nothing caught their attention. He glanced at Connor as if he wanted to dispute when he eventually stood up. There was nothing to fight for, though. Even he understood. My dad had said something. His truth could no longer be ignored. One by one, the others followed. Some were unable to look me in the eye. Some gave silent nods of sympathy, or perhaps admiration. I was unable to tell. Before long, there were only the three of us remaining. Connor cleared his throat and carefully closed the folder. With a milder tone than previously, he stated, "There will be some paperwork, but everything is in its proper place." I gave a nod. I was at a loss for words. How could I respond? He gave us a little sincere grin and walked out of the room. The ensuing quiet wasn't the same as what I had become accustomed to. It was a quiet moment, complete, as if everything had finally found its place. I turned to face Micah, retaining my hand. They continued to stare at me as if I were the strongest person alive. And perhaps I was in his eyes. He saved me, though, and he held the envelope as if it were a piece of paper rather than the truth that would change everything. We lingered a bit longer. I have no idea why. Perhaps I simply needed some breathing room. Perhaps I just wanted to sit in the one area where I felt like I belonged for the first time in a long time. I couldn't get Dad's voice out of my brain. You have my admiration. I thought I would never hear those three words. Words I needed more than I ever told myself or anybody else, but I considered all I had carried. Silence for years, of being held accountable, of being removed, and I wasn't deleted now. I was spotted, heard. Recall, I gave Micah another glance. I said in a whisper, "Thank you." He cocked his head. For what purpose? I remarked, for having more courage than me. For clinging to something important. He grinned. All I wanted was for you to hear him. I had to, not only in the video, but also in the subsequent shift. After everybody else had gone, the room was quiet. That is the truth's problem. It doesn't always appear when you're looking for it. But when it occurs, everything is different. So no, I wasn't broken when I left that room. My father's comments were still reverberating in my chest as I walked out, clutching my son's hand. I left completely, and that quiet, at last, there was significance in that silence. If you found meaning in this story, just know this: if you've ever been ignored, misunderstood, or made to feel like your voice wasn't important, you're not invisible. The truth will eventually be revealed, even though it sometimes takes time. If you felt something while listening, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it too. Only when you assist those in need of travel do stories like these get to them. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more tales like this one that are genuine, unvarnished, and heartfelt. There's a lot more to say. Till the next time, remain resilient, be kind, and never forget that your voice counts. The thing about retaliation is that it doesn't always need to be harsh or noisy. Living a good life, establishing boundaries, and choosing peace over resentment can sometimes be the most effective form of retaliation. Instead of leaving that room furious, I did so with love, strength, and clarity at my side. I hope you decide to heal rather than harm if you're carrying a burden of betrayal. Allow your development to be heard more clearly than their quiet ever was. Have you ever experienced a situation like this, where the truth struck more forcefully than retaliation could? Leave a comment with your tale. Together, let's heal. What does tranquility look like in your mind?